Okay, so that was, we're COMP2068. It's week 5, lesson 5, part 3. The first 2 parts, we kind of described the assignment 2. And part 2, I actually did a little bit of graphic manipulation just to get some idea of how I would pull in some of the graphic pieces, because I'm going to lay them out on my background, and I wanted to help you out to kind of show you what I'm doing so you can kind of start doing your own. Okay, now you may not do what I did, but approximately is what we want to head towards the same place. I also kind of put this file together to help me do some programmatically what I need to do, because I need to know these coordinates. Okay, let's just set up our project now for the first time. So I'm going to kind of go in here into Visual Studio, and if I would ask you to follow this with me. Now, if you follow me from last time, I did pull together, I did save a template with you guys for Create.js. So I would ask you to use that today. If you don't know where that is, or if you weren't able to follow along with me last week for whatever reason, maybe I was too fast for you or whatever, you could simply pull the template down from GitHub. If I go to GitHub, and this is where I have my template right now. By the way, I would ask you that you fork my slot machine if you haven't done it already up on GitHub. That'll give you a chance to start off for the slot machine backend. But if I go to my repositories, here's on GitHub, and I search for Create.js, if I start searching for that, right, I see that I have my COMP2068 Create.js boilerplate. That's the one I want to use. I don't want to start from scratch. We did all that work last week, and I don't want to do that again. I have no time for that, right? So this is what I'd ask you to fork. Go here and fork me, if you haven't done it already, to get this boilerplate, and then include it in your own files, right? That's the first thing that I ask you to do. Okay, cool. Let's do the next piece. So I'm going to use this new project. I'm going to go New Project, right? And I'm going to use that template for my files, right? So for you, you might also just download it from GitHub if you want to start from there. But for me, I'm going to kind of go into Visual Studio, and down here I've got my Create.js template for COMP2068, which is right here. And this is where I'm going to start. I'm going to call this project COMP2068 slot machine demo. Because this is what we're doing right now. We're kind of putting together our demo code and for everything. I'm going to kind of create a new Git repository for you guys up here on GitHub. So I'm going to kind of go new repository. I'm going to say comp, if you want to follow me along, COMP2068 slot machine demo, right? That's what it's going to be called. I don't know why it's lowercase comp. Let's try that now. Okay, cool. This is my URI. I'm going to go in here and connect it. I'm going to go to Home, Changes, and I'll make sure that everything is included. There's no untracked files. I don't want any of those untracked files happening to me. And I'm going to say created project from Create.js template, right? That's my first piece. And in my Solution Explorer, my Team Explorer, I'm going to go to Home, Unsync Commits, and put in my URI, and click Publish. Okay, cool. I've got it up there now under this new repository, COMP2068 slot machine demo, if you want to follow along. Okay, so get you started. All right, cool. I want to go back into my Solution Explorer, and I got to pull in some assets. Because I have some assets now I can pull in. I just made some. So I can fool around with that. So I'm going to go into my downloads where I have my new files that I created for my slot machine. Actually, I'll just name it by this. Here's my slot machine. And I have an XLS file. I also have an images file. You know what? For this example, because I want to save, I would give you guys my images. I want to also pull across my Excel file. So you can always use that as a basis. So I'm going to put all that into assets, into images for you. Okay, so into images, I'm going to kind of drag and drop all my images right now so you have them, all the things I just worked on for the last hour. I'm going to kind of put this right into images. Okay? And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Excel file and kind of pull it into my project. So it's part of my project files. So when I update it, like this one here, if I update it, I'm going to kind of put it into my project. It's going to be here. It says X for Excel, right? I can't add this in, but now I'm just going to kind of go back into my commits so you can follow along with me for this demo. And I'm going to kind of go in here and say added image assets, and Excel file. Right? Commit. I'm going to go into home, unsync commits, and sync. Okay, and then when I go back on here into GitHub, you'll see now if you go into Slot Machine Demo, I do have some images, and I also have this Excel file that you could read. You can grab right here. If you have Excel, then you can kind of pull this down. You probably won't be able to see this, but you can download the Excel file right here and see what it looks like. Okay, so you can follow along with me if you really need to. Right? And it's important that you try to, because that way we're on the same page. Make sense? That's the first piece I'm getting to right now. Okay, let's get back into this thing. So I've got my graphics, and let's run this file to see what it does right now. And if you notice, right, all it does right now is we had our basic create.js file, and it does this button, right? Which is really not what I want. This is not what I want. This is my demo kind of file that I put together with you guys last week, right? So we need to modify some of this stuff to match up with what we want to do, right? Okay, so that's cool. I know this is where my solution is going. So I need to do a couple of things in my solution. One of the things I need to do when I look at my my index.html is I know that how big my graphic is going to be. My canvas is now going to change. I know my canvas is probably best at 500 by 500. So this is what my canvas is going to be, 500 by 500. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Because that'll fit everything. Maybe even, if I remember from my examples, if I want to really get specific, it's 406 by 439. You know what? 450 by 450 might even be better, right? Because I want to get as close to it as possible. If I'm going to do a weird canvas size, you know what? I might as well go as tight as I can. Right? This is my canvas. Okay, this is cool. I've got to go into my game.ts file. Now, for you, if you're not using TypeScript, it's okay. But this is where I need to start doing my stuff here to put my main stuff in here into my game, right? I don't need this hello text rotation thing. I don't need that at all. In fact, I don't need my hello text at all. My button clicked and my button out and button over, I'm going to leave there for a second because I'm going to use these event handlers again and again, right? And I'll show you how I can do that. I do need to have my bitmap, but it's not going to be a button right now. I definitely don't need my hello text. I'm just going to get rid of all this because I just don't need this for this example. So this is all gone, right? Up in here, when I go into my game objects right now, I have something called button that I'm going to delete, and I'm going to create something else, right? So here's my game objects. Let's start from scratch. I'm going to get rid of all this. My button clicked is going to be empty. I'm going to use these event handler piece parts right now. But all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to leave them empty as functions, right? Because what I want to do is fill them in later with my other things I need. So it's not called button. All this work here I can get rid of because I need to put my first things first, right? Okay. I need my background image, so I'm going to create a new variable called background. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Let's do it together. Var background. Okay, and then I'm going to go create.js.bitmap because that's what really this thing is. It's a background image. Okay, that's cool. But you know what? And I'm going to tell you this from the get-go when we start things off. One thing I found is we can add things to the stage. That's cool. But what I'd really like to do is kind of put together a game container, right? So I have my stage, which is where we draw normally. But I've found many times that when we put together a container that's inside of my stage to hold other things, I can put things in there and add things into my container as opposed to directly onto my stage. And there's advantages to this. And so if I was going to do such a thing, I'd have to look and see if my docs to see if there's such a thing. Now I know there's a container class, but if I go to easel.js online, because I want to get some documentation and I want to look at the API reference, which is what I recommend you do, because that's what you're going to have to do over and over again. If I go to docs, for EaseL.js, right? If I click on EaseL.js and I want to look at the container class, which is right here, right? My container class is, this is what my container will look like. Here's some code actually for my container, right? I need to go var container, right? Whatever the container is equal to new create.js container to create my new object. Okay, cool. This is what I want to do because I want to add everything inside my game container. And you know what I'm going to call this thing? Game. I'm going to call this container, this object is going to be called game. This is my first object, right? So I'm not crazy, right? If I really want to, I can call it something else. But game container seems to be the right thing, or game. So I'm going to say var game is of type, I'm just declaring my variables here, create.js.container. Okay, that's the first thing. So all I'm doing is creating a reference. I'm actually telling JavaScript and TypeScript that this is the shape of these objects. I haven't actually instantiated any objects yet. I'm just creating the shape of the objects. So one is a container shape, the other one is a bitmap shape. And these are the two things for my game and my background, right? Okay, cool. I've got my container class. I've got to instantiate it now. My container class will swell. Listen to me. They'll swell to fit everything that's inside of it. Okay? It's not. There's no widths and heights for my container class. It'll contain whatever I put into it. Right? It'll swell. It'll be bigger and bigger depending on how many things I put into it, which is good and bad. That's why it takes a little bit of overhead. Right? So what I want to do here in my game class is I want to create my new container. So declare kind of, instantiate my container object, my game container, right? So I'm going to say game is equal to then new create.js.container, and that's all I want. That's the first thing I want to do, okay? So that's my container. Now guess what? Because I have a container, I can do an Addchild. Instead of doing it to the stage, I can add it to the container, right? So now I'm adding my child into the container class so I can manipulate that more, and then I'll add the whole container to the stage. Why would I want to do that? Because if I ever do want to do like an opening screen or an end screen, I can always change what's in my container and put something else into it. If I add it to the stage, later on, I'm trying to be forward thinking here because I've done this project before, right? If I add it to the stage directly, later on, if I want to make this a separate file and make it, it's a lot more work. I have to refactor everything, right? Okay, let's check this out. So this is my first piece. I've got my container class. It's called game, and then it's a global variable. And the next piece I want to add is I want to instantiate my my background. Okay, there's a couple of strategies I can use here. I know I'm going to need a couple of things for my background. I know I'm going to need an X and Y coordinate. I need those things for my background. I know I want to keep my registration point to the top left corner. This is where I want it to start. And I know I need to just plop it on the stage. There's not really much, in my game container. So let's do that first. So I'm going to say background, right, is equal to new create.js.bitmap, right? That's the first thing I'm going to do. And inside this bitmap object, I'm going to define where I'm getting it. Now I know it's inside my assets /images /background.ping file. That's what it is, because that's where I put it, right? If you notice my background itself, I look at my assets, it's under assets, images, background.ping. That's where it is. And if you notice, I can actually hover over here with Visual Studio, and it'll give me a preview of what the button of the background would look like. Okay, cool. But I haven't added it onto the stage. Now, I don't have to tell it my X and Y coordinates. I don't have to give any of that stuff to background, because you know what? By default, my background, any image you put on the stage or in a container starts at where? 0, 0, top left corner of the screen, which is where I want this thing to go. Okay? So I'm not adding it to my stage. I'm adding it to my container. So I'm going to say, so game.addchild background. Okay? Now it's on. Now I still haven't added my background, my game container to my stage, and I need to do that somewhere down here. So I might as well do that now. So stage.addchild game. Does that make sense to you? I'm adding the game, the container for the whole game, onto my stage. I'm slapping it in, right? If everything goes well, and I run my stuff now, I should be able to get a clear view of what it's going to look like. Yeah? Take a look. Got a bit of problems. For example, where my game is centered, I know I've got 450 by 450, and I also know, if I go back to my Excel file here, that my my background, here's my background, is 406 by 439. 406 is the width, and if I get 450, roughly, and I want to do some calculations, I want to take half the width of this thing, half the width, 406, right? Right? And I want to take, subtract it from, so here, hold on a second, that's wrong. So this minus 450 roughly gives me 44 pixels to play with. That means 22 on each side. So I need 22, instead of starting my game frame, my game, centering that in, or just starting on the top left corner, I want my game to start 22 pixels in from the right. Not, because I'm moving my whole, I'm not moving my, see my whole framework, right? There's two pieces here. Let me draw this out for you here so you understand, right? So you get it, because now you're gonna, I want to lose you guys. So imagine, all right, if I'm gonna draw this out, I'll just use another drawing program here so I explain to you a little bit better. I have to explain this because once you don't, if you don't get this, you're lost, right? Okay, so I've got my canvas. Here's my canvas, guys. Take a look. So let's say, no, it's not like that. Let's say, they're off centered right now. Let's say, I'll open up a new thing here, and let's say my canvas is 450 by 450. Let's just do this with fireworks. Here we go. Here's 450 by 450. I've got a white canvas on the background. So my canvas color, we're going to make it white. Here it is on the background. And now I'm going to take my background color, my background image. Here's my background image, right? This is what I'm doing. This is actually better. I'm going to copy it and go put it on the background. Look how it's off, right? This is what I'm getting right now. What I really want is for this whole thing to go like this in the middle, right? And maybe down a little bit too, right? Yeah, so, well, here it is. Look, here's my coordinates. I need to put it at 23 and 6. That's where my container, my game container is going to be. My stage is still, my inside this game container, right? My slot machine graphic, everything else is at 0, 0. The local coordinate system inside my container makes my graphic at 0, 0, right? But the global container is going to be pushed over at 23 and 6. Now, if you really don't care, if you're confused about that, you can always just still push it over on the top left. That's fine. But I'm going to try and center mine at 23 and 6, right? So I go back, and this is where it is right now. And when I go back to my code, right, here's my code. I have my game container, which I'm going to leave at 0, 0, right? Now, that's where it would normally be. But now I'm going to change my x and y coordinates. So I'm going to say game.x is equal to 23, right? And game.y, right, is equal to 6. 23 and 6. If I'm correct with these calculations, right, then it should be exactly where I want it to be. Let's refresh it. Yeah? That's why I put it inside a game container. Because imagine if I had to do that for all my graphics. Every graphic has got to be adjusted by 23 and 6. 23 and 6. Every time I want to do it, put it in my game. I could also have made, to make my life easier, really easy, right? I could have made my canvas, instead of 450 by 450, I could have made this 406 by 435, or whatever the size of my game is. But I chose to make it a square because it's easier for the computer to deal with, actually, believe it or not. Okay? So that's where my game is going to be. Okay, cool. Let's put a button on. Let's put my first button on this thing, all right? So when I'm building my interface, this is my interface piece, right? I want to put my button on, okay? So how do I put my button on? I got to put it so that way it matches what my coordinate system is here in my Excel file. So my first button is going to be my spin button, and let's put it at 323 by 376, and it's got to be a size of 46 by 46, right? Now, here's the challenge. Do I make my button centered in the middle for this one, or do I keep it top left centered? right? I should keep it top left centered because I don't want to center it in the middle of something. I'm not doing that yet. So I keep my registration point in the top left corner of my image. That's fine because I've got these coordinates are all top left coordinates, right? So leave them be is what I'm telling you. Okay, cool. Let's go back over here. I've got my background, and now I'm going to create my button. Right? Here's my button, and I know I need to create the button's got to be called like spin button or something. So I'm going to declare it as a global object. Var spin button, right? Is a create.js bitmap object. That's what it is, right? And I've named it up there. Now I can go back down here, right? And I can add this to my background. So I'm going to say spin button is equal to new create.js.bitmap, and I can actually add it in. So I'm going to say assets.images.spin button. I think I named it like this, .ping, and put it on board, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this game.addchild. I can do this here with my spin button. I want to show you where it appears if I don't put any x and y coordinates, right? If my game, I didn't put it to game and I put it to stage, it would appear at the top left corner of my stage. But because I've used a game container object, right? When I just do this, it'll be at the top left corner of my game container. Let me show you what I mean. If I refresh this thing. There it is. This is my game container. These little dotted lines is my stage. It's not centering itself on the stage. It's relative to my new game container that I created, which is the size of my background image, right? So this is where it's going to be. But I don't need it up here. I need it down here. And for me to do that, I got to specify where it's going to be. All right. So cool. I want to put it down there, and I know that if in my Excel file, it tells me that it's got to be at 323 by 376 if I'm accurate. Now there might be a little bit of discrepancy. Find out in a second. 323 by 376. Okay, cool. So that's what I'm going to put in here. Let's say spin button.x equals 323. Spin button.y equals 376. All right. If I'm accurate, I'm going to refresh, right? And zoom to zoom. I've got my spin button in the right location. You can't tell. It's over the other one. Okay, now I want to make it so that some interactivity, because I got my first button, right? Just so that way, you know how this is working out, right? Okay, I know this is cool. This is true, right? I want to add some event listeners or event handlers, but I don't want to do it here in my main game. Maybe what I need to do is create something called, create interface or something like that, or create UI as a function. Let's do that first. So function, right? I'm going to call this create UI, right? And in my create UI is where I'm going to do this stuff. I'm going to do my, I'm going to keep my game container here because I think it's easier. But for my background and for my spin button, this is my spin button, right? I'm going to take this stuff, I'm going to cut it out of here, I'm going to put it over here inside my create UI method or function, right? And now, of course, what I want to do is I want to take this thing. Why is it giving me an error? Oh yeah, I'll be okay. It doesn't take any variables, and you know what? To be accurate with create.js, I want it to return void. Right, which means I'm not returning anything back. I'm telling create.js this is the way, I'm kind of creating a function that doesn't return anything. Okay? If I try and make create UI return something later on, code hinting will come up saying, hey, that doesn't return anything. What are you talking about? Right? If I put in here, it returns a string, right? And I don't add in a return statement. It'll be another line saying, hey, you've got a non-void return type, but you haven't added a return statement to remind me. Void is okay, right? Because I'm not going to return anything. Okay, cool. I've got these two things, my background and my spin button. And now I need to add this create UI method down here. I'm going to call it down here inside my main function, right? Makes sense? So here is I'm doing almost like pseudocode. create my user interface, right? Or create slot machine is what I probably want to say, slot machine user interface, right? And now in my spin button, I can put in here, I've got my other function, I'm going to add in my event handlers, right? So I'm going to go spin button dot add event listener, right? And I'm going to make it a click event. When I click on the button, right, I want to spin my reels, if I will. That's going to generate my spin reels function, right? I don't have that. I'm going to call it, you know, spin reels. That's what it'll do. If I can click on it, then it'll spin my reels. Well, I don't have my spin my reels function. I'm going to kind of put a placeholder about it right up here. Function spin reels. Right, there it is, right? And I kind of add in a kind of a placeholder function. It doesn't really do anything. I'm going to say add spin reels code here. Right, because I don't have that yet. So I've kind of created a stub for my code, right? A stub. That's all it is. There's nothing in there right now. It's just empty. But this won't give me an error. It won't error out anymore, right? If I just want to test the spin button is working, I can just put it in here. I can do a console.log, right? And I'll say spin button clicked, right? Just to check that it worked, right? And let's do that. Let's just run this thing the way it is, right? And now that I have my spin button, I want to click it. But let's just pull up the JavaScript console, which is my friend. JavaScript console is my friend when I do development, right? Let's pull this all the way down so I can see my slot machine. Here it is, right? And in here, I want to click the button. Let's see if it gives me that message. Oh, hey, there it is. Oh, every time I click that button, it's going to give me a message. So I know that it's responding to my clicks. This is a good thing, right? So my spin button is working, but it doesn't really give me any feedback. Remember last time we did that alpha effect? I'm going to do the same thing here, but to a lesser degree. So I think it's a little bit too much, 0.5. Let's make it so that you can kind of tell. And by the way, the better thing to do is when you hover over to flip out the button and make it something else, like a faded out button, as opposed to use your alpha. Because remember, anything programmatically that you do takes more cycles than if you do it on the graphic side of things of the house, when you're making a program, when you're making a game. Now in this case, we don't have a lot of buttons, so it's okay. Now remember, in order for me to make that happen, I have to make sure, if I'm going to hover or do any effects, I have to have this enable mouse over activated, which we did last time when we created our template. Okay? But remember, this takes up cycles. This slows down our game a little bit, this thing right here. So we only activate it if we have an interface we have to click on. In this particular case, we have buttons to click, so it makes sense. Right? Okay. So we have that functionality, and we have a couple of some of these event handlers we're going to use for our button. I have a button over and a button out, right? And you know what? I'm going to use this same idea here to generate my my spin button over and spin button out. That's what I'm going to call it. So I'm just going to rename these things. I don't need my button clicked for now because I have my spin button clicked event, which is going to be my spin reels, right? Spin reels method, right? But I do want to do this spin button, and now you're gonna already mention some stuff to me. You're gonna say, Tom, this is inefficient because don't I have to do this spin button out and spin button over and over again for every single button? And the answer right now, because we're doing it procedurally without object orientation, is yes. This is what we'd have to do. We'd have to create these events over and over again. So my spin button over, when I'm over it, I want to say spin button dot alpha, right, is equal to let's say 0.7, so 70% alpha. Let's try that out. Maybe it's 0.6, might be a better value. We'll know that in a second. And my spin button dot alpha, when I'm out, is back up to 100%, right? That's what's going to happen here. So basically, gray it out when I'm over, or change the alpha value a little bit, and go back to 100% after. It might not be enough. It might be too much. We'll see in a second. Okay, I need to create a couple more event listeners now. Remember, like we did last time, spin button dot add event listener, and then I'm going to do the mouse over event. That's what I'm listening for, and we're going to go do the spin button out. We actually comes up in our code hinting, right? Right there it is, and the same thing with our. I'm just going to copy and paste because I'm lazy. I'm going to do the next event handler. our event listener. Here's my event listener. Instead of mouse over, it's going to be mouse out. And of course, it's mouse spin button out. That's the callback function I'm calling, right? Which is up here, right? Which I've just declared. Okay, if everything goes well, then when I run this thing, I should be able to get this in and out kind of functionality, right? Let's just refresh. And refreshing sometimes is a good thing because as I go over, I may or may not see a nice effect, right? Let's try it again. And let's go into the JavaScript console. I'm going to go to more JavaScript console here. If I click on it, I still get my spin event, but I don't seem to get any kind of enough degradation here. Why? Because I have another spin button behind it that looks like spin button. So I may need to really go differently here in my alpha. Just as an example, just to make sure I have some output for troubleshooting purposes, I'm going to put in here console.log, right? I'll say, mouse over, right? And then a console.log. Actually, that's wrong. Console.log, mouse over is here. And this will be mouse out. So we can check to see if my events are firing. Mouse out, okay? And I'll change my alpha to go like to 0.4, right? So way down there, more of a difference. Let's check that out. And that might not be enough either. Save everything. That's another thing we have to learn to do. And then refresh. If I go over it, I should get my mouse over and mouse out, which means my events are firing. Take a look. When I mouse over and mouse out, it's working. I'm not getting a significant difference because I've got my mouse in the background for my background here. I physically have another spin event, like another button that's sitting there, and I can't notice the difference, right? Let me show you if I zoom in what I'm talking about. I'm going to zoom in to way up. I'm going to pan down for you guys to see it, right? Do you see that there's any kind of difference? It's too hard to see because my background over here, what was that? It's showing it, but it's not doing anything, right? So in order for me to do it, what do I need to do? I need to change my graphic. My graphic on my background, I have to erase my buttons because I already know their positioning, right? And then that'll fix that. It's 147. I'm going to leave that piece to you to figure out, but all I'd have to do is, because I don't have time, I'd have to erase all these buttons from the background, and then you see this mouse over event a little bit better. I can't see it right now because I have another button sitting behind, right? Remember, if I go back to my graphic, right, here's my graphic, and if I zoom in here, right, these buttons have to be removed. And the way I'm going to do that, of course, is take a sample for these buttons and then overlay them. And I got some really good sample sizes here, right? Let me take a look. Here's my sample for my background. I'm just going to reload it. Here's my background. And in here, I've got a really good sample that I could use to get rid of my buttons, which is this big piece right here in the middle, right? So I'm going to sample it like this. This is what I would probably do, right? I want to copy it and then put it on top of these ones to get rid of all the buttons. And then now I don't need them anyway. I've already sized where they're going to go. And I can put my buttons on top of there, and it'll be perfect.
So it's on top, and then it will
It'll actually appear where I want it to be, and the effect will be perfect. Any questions around this stuff?
Where I specify